Hello, I'm Lawanda Cook with the K. Lisa Yang and Hockey Tian Institute at Cornell University. I'd like to tell you about a study that I did with my colleague Vicki Chang in 2019. The study called Should I Stay or Should I Go? Focused on the retirement considerations of older healthcare workers. Now, this is an important issue to study because of a couple of things. The US population in general is getting older, right? And we know that with aging, there's also a growing need for healthcare professionals. So, for instance, we know that by 2016, about a quarter of the population will be over the age of 65. We also know that the prevalence of disability and chronic health conditions increases with age. And so, as the population ages and there's a greater need for healthcare professionals, the need is not really being addressed by the number of people coming into the field. In other words, the need is growing faster than the number of people entering the field. And so, as the general population ages, we know that that means that the workforce is aging. And currently, about 1 in 4 workers is age 55 or older. We also know that most workers intend to work beyond the age of 65. So, how do we look at that and keep more older workers within the healthcare field if they're willing and able to stay? I want to point out that this study was undertaken before COVID-19 and that certainly there have been some additional changes within the healthcare field and within the healthcare workforce, including that it is a bit harder to keep people in the field, or at least in the positions they have held, given the current situation. So this will be an ongoing area of concern, and we do need to start looking at how do we fill these gaps. So our goal here was really to gain some insights that would aid employers in retaining older healthcare workers. The study design included recruiting through professional networks, social media, and word of mouth. And then we held 5 virtual focus groups. From the 22 focus group participants, we selected 6 individuals to participate in individual interviews. Our participants included people with a wide variety of job titles, working in all kinds of employment settings. Everyone was over the age of 50 and all were employed at the time of the study. Most of our participants fell within the age range of 60 to 69. 31 to 40 years was the average time that people had been in the field. A lot of expertise. Our theoretical framework for the study was a considering work model, which looked at the medical, psychosocial, financial, and vocational considerations that influence employment decisions. On this table, I have some sample questions. So I wanted to give you an idea of the types of questions we ask for each area of consideration or domain. And so for the medical domain, we had a question like, how does your own health influence your work life? For the vocational domain, what is one policy, practice, or resource in your workplace that helps or would help you the most in staying on the job? So again, trying to get at what employers can do. In analyzing the data, Vicki and I each reviewed the focus group and interview transcripts multiple times. We did this individually and reviewed them multiple times. We identified prevalent themes and sub-themes and really each tried to kind of get a sense of what is happening here and what are the stories being told, what are the needs being identified. Then we conferred with each other on participants' meanings, their themes, the examples of themes, really looking, can we show connections between what they're talking about and these 4 areas of interest, areas of consideration. So as I talk with you about some of the findings from the study, I'll be talking about things that both help people to stay on the job as well as things that could work as disincentives. Because we all know that if we're working, there's a pretty good chance there are some things, both about the job and about our life circumstance, that really lead us to stay in a particular type of employment or place of employment. And then there are other things that could, under certain circumstances, lead us to leave that job or the field altogether. So a key finding around medical considerations is that participants were very aware of changes in their memory and physical capacity. there was a genuine concern for the ability to continue to provide quality care for patients. And so what this meant is that sometimes people, as they aged, they begin to work different types of positions or in different settings. We have a quote here: at this age with different conditions, I couldn't be doing the hospital bedside nursing. I couldn't work in ICU as I did when I was younger. So that was one of the medical concerns. It's sort of like a negative or a potential problem is, can I maintain? Can I do the work, and how will I have to change how I do the work as I age? A positive was the health benefits of continuing to work. And by this, I mean the actual ways in which staying employed benefits the health of the employee. So an individual talked about, the work has spurred me to stay up as much as possible with what's going on, both physically and intellectually. And several participants also mentioned how valuable work was in terms of their emotional well-being, social and emotional well-being. So psychosocial considerations at work, um, the biggest one in terms of a negative or a disincentive to continue was the stressful nature of work, the job demands. Certainly healthcare is an extremely demanding type of work. And now in the current situation with the pandemic and other issues of violence and so forth, I would say that all of that is certainly increasing. And again, this is part of why this type of research is important and why we need to continue to look at how do we maintain people who are committed to the field? What can we do to make it easier for them to stay if they're willing and able to do so? So looking at the psychological or psychosocial considerations, one of the individuals kind of summed up the stress in this way. They said, I wouldn't say there were any particular spikes like, oh my God, this is so stressful and terrible. It was just a constant sense of being so overwhelmed and drowning and no end in sight to the work. Now, on the flip side of that, another psychosocial consideration was the meaningful nature of the work, right? And this idea that for many individuals, they talked about the work being a calling or a ministry, something they felt strongly led to do, strongly connected to do, and really honored to do, to be so involved in the lives of other people. Financial considerations are always important when thinking about retirement. And so participants did talk about the desire to have enough resources, have enough years in and have enough money that they can retire and enjoy retirement with a decent quality of life as close to what they have known, what they've known and have known during their work life. They're hoping to have that same level as much as possible in retirement. And it's a motivator to keep working until they feel they've reached that level. Another motivator to keep working is the need for insurance for themselves and for family members. Individuals, particularly the individuals who identified as having disabilities. Not everyone in the study had disabilities, but for those who did identify with having disabilities and chronic health conditions, there was a motivation to stay, a stronger motivation to stay for insurance purposes. The understanding that if they left before they qualified for Medicare, that having to cover those expenses on their own would just be really very challenging and might not allow them the same level of care as they currently can have through their employer. Looking at the vocational considerations, a couple of the findings, one of the big ones, this was one that we really had to kind of play around with, what do we call this? And we determined it was really a values conflict. And this is the challenge between like what is like happening with the insurance industry and what's billable, which is important to the organization, and then what feels like really helping people on the side of the employee, or why the employee is motivated to do the work. And so we have a quote here that kind of demonstrates that tension, that conflict around what's billable. It says, my compensation and my evaluations are based on productivity. How many patients do I see? How is my billing? The more time you take off, the less number of patients you see, and so that affects your compensation and your reviews. And so there's really no downtime. A vocational consideration that was also brought up, and really people gave a lot of examples of the value of this, was flexible work options. In instances where the organization provided for flexible work options, older workers just felt they could better manage to keep work as part of their life. And so people talked about having the flexibility to work hours that made sense for them as they age, that where they had hours where they could spend time on any caregiving or support responsibilities they might have within their family, as well as just being able to take better care of themselves and just enjoy their family. Another vocational consideration was around professional development opportunities. Now, we know that older workers often get a little bit of a bad rap, or we make some assumptions about what their interest is and what their ability is to learn, particularly around technology. And the participants in our study did speak to that. And they did say, in some cases, it's a little bit harder for them to learn or catch up. But in every case, they were actually quite interested in new learning. So one of the things that came up as a positive that a company can do is to have these professional development opportunities of all types. And not whether it be like in services, whether it be tech training, perhaps with other older folks who are really good at it and can kind of do a peer-to-peer training, but also allowing people to go for higher level or advanced degrees. And so to move from bedside nursing to PhDs, for instance. So some of the specific recommendations for employers: recognize the commitment and assets of older workers. This was really important to these workers who've stayed in the field. They want to be seen as valued resources. They feel they have a lot to offer, not only through their work experience. Remember, they had over 30 years work experience, but they also had like life experience, and they want younger colleagues to recognize that. And what I mean by recognize is really just to utilize their knowledge. They also talked about, again, this idea of flexible work arrangements. This was really something that they valued very much. If employers could offer flexible work arrangements in terms of time and location, creating a positive culture for older workers. Most of our participants did feel like, on the whole, they were well accepted, so their psychosocial involvement at work was mostly positive. Some did talk about a few situations where they felt like age plus disability, and sometimes gender, might have led the company to discourage things that they want to do, or to change their role and maybe give some of their previous responsibilities to someone else without actually checking with the person to see whether they wanted to give up those responsibilities. And one thing that folks did comment on is that younger generations tended to not be quite as committed to their work. And we asked more about what they meant by that. Is it so easy to say, well, millennials don't care the way we care, kind of thing. And so we asked them to go a little bit deeper on that. And what we got from it really wasn't so much that younger people didn't care about the work. It was more that younger employees expected better work-life balance. They did not expect and were not willing to take as much work home and to work, really long hours without a chance for a break. And so in that discussion, particularly in the focus groups, people were able to say, yeah, they do seem to have maybe a different attitude. They don't seem quite as committed. They're not as invested as we are. But they were also able to say that what the younger employees want and are really insisting on in terms of work-life balance has also benefited them. They were able to see that. And they talked about supporting workers' well-being through all dimensions, all wellness dimensions, providing those opportunities to both be a learner and a teacher through learning and mentoring opportunities. And then also that they wanted to have companies encourage the use of wellness resources without penalty. So as an example, one person talked about the employer provides massage, but this individual said they don't ever want to use that resource because if they spend half an hour getting a massage, they have to take work home that night. The work doesn't go away. There's a consequence, a negative consequence. And then going back to the billing, and if I have too many days where I do wellness things and try to take care of myself, I lose time seeing patients, and then my evaluations are not as positive, right? And so it's a kind of a cycle of concern in that way. So these are some things for employers to keep in mind and trying to really hold on to older healthcare workers who have that commitment, who in many cases would like to stay, but really would benefit from these kinds of steps in order to feel both valued and really able to keep work as part of their lives.